You know, back when I started this channel and I started making videos in about 2011, some of the first things that I made were theory videos. They were very, very bad theory videos, but they were theory videos nonetheless. Of course, I no longer make those kinds of videos. My content has changed a lot since then, but I still find the concept of fan theories to be very intriguing. That's always been something that's very interesting to me. So, while I was rewatching Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra for research for this year's Avatar month, I got to thinking about some fan theories that I've seen from around the internet, and I started developing some of my own. So today, we're going to be talking about 3 different Avatar theories. Some that I thought of myself, and others that I found from around the internet that I'll be either confirming or debunking. And if you guys know my track record with theories, then chances are you could probably tell which is which. But with that said, smash that motherfucking like button, let's get weird, let's get wild, and let's get right into some Avatar fan theories that might just be true.
Don't take them too seriously though, it's just for fun.
Our first theory of the day is one that attempts to bridge the gap between The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra. One character that we never saw much of in The Legend of Korra was Sokka. He's dead by the start of the series and is only mentioned once or twice and is only seen in a flashback, and is the only character from the original gang who doesn't seem to have any descendants. You know, Aang and Katara obviously had kids together, Toph has kids, Zuko has kids. Sokka is the only one who didn't, or at least doesn't seem to. This seems especially odd since Sokka and Suki were clearly together by the end of The Last Airbender, so you'd think that they'd have kids together, especially given Sokka's position as chief of the Southern Water Tribe at the time, so he'd probably want a son as his successor. There are a few theories out there regarding who Sokka's kids were and who the mother is. Some people think that Su Yin is actually Sokka and Toph's secret love child, but this just seems like shipper fuel since there's really no evidence for it other than, you know, Toph had a crush on Sokka in The Last Airbender and that we don't know who Su Yin's father was. That seems like a bit of a stretch if you ask me. However, there's another candidate for Sokka's progeny, and it's none other than Icknick Blackstone Varrick. But I guess to prove this, we're gonna need some evidence, so let's start off with the absolute basics of genetic inheritance. It's clear that Varrick clearly shares a lot of physical features with Sokka. They both have brown skin, blue eyes, and similarly shaped eyebrows. However, these traits seem to be common between all Water Tribe citizens, so they can't exactly be used to pinpoint relation. For example, Bumi doesn't look like Aang or Katara, so you probably wouldn't know that he's their son, so looks and genetics aren't necessarily all there are to this. If we want to prove that Sokka is Varrick's father, then we have to look at Varrick's backstory, which he hints at several times throughout the series. Here is what we know about Varrick and his backstory from what he said in the show. He is a Water Tribe nobleman, he was born to a poor seal hunter, he grew up on a farm, and eventually joined the circus. These things by themselves seem rather contradictory, so we're gonna have to use a little bit of conjecture here. Let's go in order here, starting with Varrick's economic status. Varrick is a Southern Water Tribe nobleman, making him a man of very high status, and this is quite apparent if you look at his eccentric nature and expensive tastes. To attain this type of status, you don't necessarily need to be born into it, you just have to be wealthy, so this isn't necessarily indicative of Varrick's heritage. Next, let's take a look at who he claims his father was, a poor seal hunter. Sokka did start off as a poor seal hunter, just look at the first episode of The Last Airbender, but by the time Varrick would have been born, Sokka would have either been the chief of the Southern Water Tribe, a Republic City councilman, or dead, so he's clearly no longer the poor seal hunter he once was, so we could probably rule this out. Varrick also states that he grew up on a farm, but the problem with that is that what kind of farm would exist in the South Pole? It's all ice, you can't grow shit, and I highly doubt that ostrich horses, which Varrick claimed to have as a kid, would be of any use in the snow. This leads me to believe that though Varrick was born in the Southern Water Tribe and is considered a Water Tribe citizen, he didn't grow up there, and perhaps he grew up somewhere else. This also falls in line with Varrick's statement regarding his time in the circus, since it's clear that his childhood wasn't spent in the South Pole. However, all of this evidence should also be taken with a huge grain of salt, since Varrick is a known pathological liar and exaggerates almost everything he says. So it makes sense that he'd lie about his own past to make himself seem interesting and eccentric. Some of the things he says might be true, but since we can't tell what's true and what's just a story, we can't definitively use any of it to prove anything. Okay, so what else? What other evidence is there that could possibly genetically link Sokka to Varrick? Well, when it comes to legacy characters, that is, characters that are descendants of older characters, sometimes all you need to link the two are some cinematic parallels. For instance, Anakin Skywalker and Luke Skywalker are very similar characters in terms of their personalities and skill sets. Both are great pilots, both grew up on Tatooine, both trained under Obi-Wan Kenobi, both struggled with the dark side, both were Jedi. You get the picture. Well, we can apply this same type of logic to Sokka and Varrick. Both are inventors, both have a knack for business, both have rather eccentric personalities when in positions of power, both of them dated the fucking moon. Varrick is basically Sokka without any of the humble. At the end of the day, I doubt this theory has any validity to it without making up some elaborate fanfiction to make it work. I'd say that chances are Sokka is not Varrick's father, but the idea that he could be is intriguing and might hold some weight in certain aspects. Let's move on to something a little more tangible here. How powerful was Aang's childhood mentor and friend, Monk Gyatso? We don't know a whole lot about Monk Gyatso. All we do know is that he was on the Southern Air Temple's Council of Elders, making him a very experienced airbending master. But how powerful was he, exactly? I think to figure this out, we need to look at his sight of death. At the start of the 100-Year War, Fire Lord Sozin and the Fire Nation army used the power of Sozin's comet to attack the air temples, killing every airbender in the world except for Aang. And despite his immense power, Gyatso was part of the casualties. But he didn't go down without a fight. If we look at the site of Gyatso's death in Season 1, Episode 3, the Southern Air Temple, we see Gyatso's skeleton amongst a ton of dead firebenders. My main piece of evidence here is the fact that Gyatso's clothes are relatively undamaged, so if he was killed with fire by a firebender, then his clothes would have burned away. So since his clothes are still intact after 100 years, then it's clear that fire was not what killed him. But if firebenders didn't kill him, then who did? My theory is that Gyatso killed himself. Not intentionally, but his efforts to protect his people proved to be too taxing on his body, thereby killing him in the process. So how would this happen? Well, if you know how fire works, then it's pretty obvious. In order for fire to exist, it needs oxygen, it needs air. If Monk Gyatso wasn't harmed by fire on the day where firebenders are at their most powerful, then it's clear that Monk Gyatso removed the air from the area with his airbending. Think Zahir bending the air out of the Earth Queen's lungs, but on a much larger scale. Monk Gyatso used his immense skill and power in airbending to suck all the oxygen and air out of the area, out of a certain radius, creating a vacuum in which no firebenders could bend and nobody could breathe. The human body can only survive without air for about 3 minutes, so Monk Gyatso would have had to keep this up for about that long. A technique this big requires immense skill and airbending, and insane endurance to do so for that long. Gyatso is able to use this technique to protect himself from a bunch of firebenders, but unfortunately due to his old age, his body couldn't handle using the technique for as long as he did, so his body literally gave out. And that's assuming that he himself could breathe while using it. So it's even more likely that this attack was a final gambit that would kill himself in the process, and Gyatso probably knew that going into it. The only real problem with this theory is that airbenders are pacifists and will only fight in self-defense, and even then they probably wouldn't kill their opponent if they didn't need to. The key word there, however, is need, since if it were a life or death situation, I bet an airbender would kill if they had no other choice, and I think a potential genocide of an entire race is a justifiable reason for a pacifist to kill. If this theory is true, then it's pretty impressive, but even if it's not, it's fun to think about either way. And since we're talking about airbenders, I raise you this theory. Aang was not the last airbender. Okay, I know that's not true. I mean, it's in the title of the show, and it would kind of defeat the entire purpose if Aang wasn't the last of his people. It's true that Aang, at the time of the series, is the last person on the planet with the ability to airbend. That is indisputable. But I think it's entirely possible that members of the Air Nation survived the genocide and went into hiding in the other nations. And I think a prime example of this is every Avatar fan's childhood crush, Ty Lee. Obviously, Ty Lee is not an airbender, but I think it's entirely possible that she certainly has air nomad blood. And the reason I think this, the eyes. Like we established earlier with the Varrick theory, members of each nation are very ethnically similar. They all share specific genetic traits, and one that is constant across the board is that each nation has a specific eye color. Water Tribe citizens all have blue eyes, Earth Kingdom citizens all have either green or brown eyes, Fire Nation citizens have yellow or light brown eyes, while Air Nomads have gray eyes. We can see this in our main cast with Sokka and Katara having blue eyes, Toph has green eyes, though they're a bit glazed over because she's blind, Zuko has yellow eyes, and Aang has gray eyes. And this whole thing about eye color can be confirmed if you look at any character who is on screen frequently, not including random background characters that are on screen for 2 seconds or random characters of the week. It's also important to note that characters' true eye color is their eye color in broad daylight, so you can't use like these dimly lit settings to gauge eye color because it usually changes the color. However, there are definitely exceptions to this rule, such as Suki, an Earth Kingdom citizen who has blue eyes. This would make sense though, considering how close Kyoshi Island is to the Southern Water Tribe, so there would obviously be some crossbreeding, for lack of a better term. This would imply, of course, that Suki has some sort of Water Tribe heritage that could go back pretty far. The other exception to this rule, as I hinted at earlier, is Ty Lee. Despite being a Fire Nation citizen, Ty Lee has gray eyes, which are characteristic of the Air Nomads, implying that Ty Lee has some Air Nomad DNA. This could be entirely possible considering how close the Eastern and Western Air Temples are to the Fire Nation, so it's possible that in a more peaceful time, Air Nomads mingled with the Fire Nation and potentially had children. However, the eye color theory doesn't completely hold up, as there are characters who also have gray eyes, and I doubt they're all descendants of airbenders, because if they were, Aang probably would not be the last one. If any Fire Nation citizen were to be one of those descendants, it would have to be Ty Lee. She's a very spiritual and free person, and after all, air is the element of freedom and is the most spiritual element, so that lines up with her personality. She also talks about seeing auras, which is a very spiritual concept. Her fighting style is very fluid and precise, and the way she moves is almost like that of an airbender. Her knowledge of chi blocking is also of note here, since chi paths were something that we only see visualized by the water tribes and the air nomads. Airbender tattoos are meant to go along these chi paths, so it makes sense that an airbender or someone of air nomad descent would know these paths and pass this knowledge on to their children, though to be fair, chi blocking is a much older technique than the show makes it out to be. Ty Lee shares many traits with airbenders, so it's entirely possible that someone in her lineage was an airbender at some point. And I'd like to think that if Ty Lee is still alive during the Legend of Korra, that she was one of the people to get airbending after harmonic convergence. But with all that said, these have been 3 Avatar theories that I personally found interesting. Some of them worked, some of them didn't, and some just worked better as headcanon, I suppose. Let me know what you all think down below, leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe to see the rest of this month's Avatar videos. I've been MattCMG. I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.